We are fairly deep in the weeds of the New Testament today, aren't we? We're running 3 different themes and throwing a little of the Bhagavad Gita. We have a lot to deal with today. As it happens, I also gave the sermon spoke last week about, this is like 2 parts. Last week is what makes us collapse and fail, and this one is how we can avoid doing it. But the lines between them are not so clear. Last week, we were talking about Judas, which we're not going to talk about now. If you're curious, you can go on the internet and read it, hear it again. But Judas is, one of the dramatic moments in Judas's life was what's referred to here today, which is when Mary Magdalene, who was the same Mary who's the sister of Martha, Mary Magdalene, Jesus is having dinner with his disciples. It's told 2 places in the Bible, but the one that's in the Gospel of John is at the very last week of Jesus' life, when the disciples were gathered with him, with Jesus, and they didn't know, but Jesus knew that the whole story was about to end in the most dramatic possible way. Mary Magdalene, who was a sinner, she had been a courtesan, which is a more elegant word than prostitute, because I think she was a courtesan. She wasn't a prostitute. She was a high-class person, but she lived outside the norm. But when she met Jesus and was magnetized by the more elevated understanding of the purpose of life, because she was already bold and different in the way that she lived, she was able to throw herself into the new way of life without any concern that many others had. What will other people think? What will my wife or husband think? She was just one-pointed. So Jesus had converted her by his presence, and she had no other reality in her mind except her devotion to this teacher and everything that he had taught her, everything that it meant to her. So he's there having dinner with his men disciples, and she comes into the room. She probably just crashes in through the front door. I always like to think about the Bible as if it were really happening today, now, because I had so many years with Swami Kriyananda. I was often in public or semi-public places or hosted in various places with him where he was treated, not surprisingly, with a great deal of reverence. But I always imagine being in someone's gracious home and then having somebody else break in and do what Mary Magdalene did, which is she fell at his feet. She washed his feet. Literally, they say she washed his feet with her tears. She took her long hair and she used her hair to dry his feet. Then she broke a vial of very expensive ointment onto him, and the whole house was filled with the smell. You can imagine other people thinking that, well, it's nice, to have regard for this teacher, as we all, of course, do. We respect him a great deal, but really, this is just too much, And then Judas, because he was concerned about money, this is a story from last week, he takes it from the economic point of view. That ointment that she just broke over his feet was very expensive. If we had used that money, we could have helped a lot of poor people. What is she doing with this extravagance? And that's, in that context, that's when Jesus said, the poor you have always with you. Poverty is a condition of this world. It will go on and on. But me, you have not always. And he was speaking, Swami takes it today into an experience, an elevated experience of the divine presence. Is when it comes, one should honor it. But in the context, Jesus was saying that, but he was also saying, and he even says in the expanded version of the verse, the whole verse, he said, she was saving this for the hour of my death, which was one of those, like he's hinting because a week later, in fact, he was crucified, and in fact, Mary Magdalene was there and helped take his body off the cross, laid it out on the anointing stone. This is vivid for those of us who've recently been in Israel. There's the hill where he was crucified. Now it's all inside a big church, but it was just a hill, and they carried him down and laid him down on a stone, and the stone is there. And then they anointed him with oil. And of course, Mary Magdalene, they had to do it quickly because it was the Sabbath and they had to get him into the tomb before the sun went down. Mary Magdalene comes back on Easter morning, planning to take care of his body more graciously, but there was no body because Jesus had resurrected. Oops, But Jesus says she was saving this for the hour of my death. So she can do it now. Why not? You won't always have me here. And then, then everything happened. Jesus betrays, all that takes place. Mamma mia, there's so many parts of that you have to think about. How would we have felt? How would we feel now if somebody sort of rushes in and bows at the feet of someone here, goes up to Helen, and I'm trying to give a sermon, and she's, having her feet washed, and, Swami Kriyananda once, this individual was not motivated by true spirituality. He was mentally unbalanced, but this man at Ananda village, and one of the Spiritual Renewal Week events, a few of you in the room, I think, were there at the time. This man had lost, it sometimes happens, sometimes people become too intense and they slip off for a little while. This man hid in the bushes and then took off all his clothes and then just walks out stark naked and stretches himself out in front of Swamiji and just sort of prostrates himself there like this. Swami's giving a talk. Let me think exactly how it went. Swami's giving a talk, and then some of the managers sort of start moving to the side, and Swami kind of signals them, leave him alone, but somebody throws a blanket over him, just for the sense of propriety, puts a blanket over him. So he's just stretched out there, and Swami just goes on as if nothing was happening. And it would have just sort of ended like that, but the man kept inching his way forward until finally he's gripping Swami's feet, and that was not sufficient. Swami's talk, he's like this. We're all kind of trying to listen. Swami's trying to go on. He's gripping Swami's feet, and then he begins to sob. And when he began to sob, Swami, I'm not sure exactly what he said, but he made some comment to him, and then he kind of motioned, and they came and took him off. And then Swami just says casually, sometimes these things happen. Just like that. And then he just went on from it. Not any kind of censure. And the man, and then Swami talked to him afterwards and said, really, let's keep things in proportion. And the man came back and really survived the incident quite normally. But I've sat there and watched it happen. But Mary Magdalene was entirely different. Because earlier, and these are all the threads in this story, Martha and Mary, who were sisters, this is when a whole lot of every time Jesus came anywhere, a big entourage came with him. Those of us who live in Palo Alto, we understand this because for years, Swami Kriyananda would come and visit periodically, and he would always bring an entourage with him. The table in the house that I live in, you can put 16 chairs around it. And we often had 16 chairs around that, and somebody, usually me, was cooking in the kitchen. I cooked for 2 weeks before he came so that we could make the whole thing work. And so when Martha says to Jesus, my sister Mary is not helping me, I have a heart for that. Because there were 12 disciples plus God knows who else, and they all had to eat, and they're all getting to sit and listen to Jesus, and she's in the kitchen chopping vegetables. And it would be natural to feel a little crappy about it. So she goes to Jesus and said, come on, I have to feed all of you guys. You come, I'm happy to have you, but my sister's just sitting here and I'm in the kitchen. And then Jesus scolds, not Mary, but Martha. But what he scolds her for is that she's so anxious. Here she has this extraordinary opportunity to serve all these devotees, to do all this wonderful work, and create this atmosphere and serve Jesus himself, whom you will not always have with you. And instead of surrendering to the opportunity and the joy of it, she's thinking about how much trouble it is and how busy I am and how everybody ought to help me. And so he tells Martha that Mary is doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is she is remembering God. And he doesn't say, and this is, Swami points this out, the Bible doesn't say whether Jesus said to Mary, Mary, go help your sister Martha, she needs help in the kitchen, which he could easily have said, because he wasn't talking about what they were doing. He was only talking about the consciousness with which they were doing it. Because even the most noble action can be radically diminished if we do it resentfully, if at the end of it, instead of feeling joyous and free and privileged, we feel martyred and put upon, and how could they ask that of me? When I first moved to Ananda Village, which was the summer of 71, I moved on June 1st, and within a month, I was in the kitchen. I was cooking in the kitchen. I didn't know how to cook, but I was a food fanatic, so I was interested in diet and all of that. And let's see, where was it? Oh, yes. And there was a very experienced cook in there, but after about 2 weeks, she had a family emergency, and in the middle of the night, she just got up and drove away. So suddenly, I was in charge, much to the detriment of the people I was serving, because I was a terrible cook. But I put food on the table time after time. And then what happened, I gradually got better at what I was doing. But at that period of time, Swami Kriyananda would come up to what was the meditation retreat every other Sunday and give the Sunday satsang. And in between, others of us who were less capable, but nonetheless had to be given the chance to learn to become capable, other people, not including me, took turns giving the service. Let me be fair, at that time, it was probably just Jyotish, so he was quite capable of doing it. But it wasn't Swami. I have to be perfect. No, there was a few others who were. So I started doing this. Every time Swami gave service, I would do the very best I could to put out the most beautiful lunch, because everybody stayed for lunch at that point. I did everything as well as I could to make it for Swamiji. And when the other people were giving service, whatever, it would do, like that. And I did that pretty consistently for a while, and then two things occurred to me. One, Swamiji never put himself as separate from us. We were all brothers and sisters following the same master together. And even though he recognized that he was our older brother, he never allowed or encouraged any kind of extravagance around him. So it gradually began to occur to me that Swami himself would not appreciate what I was doing. That for you, I'll do it, but for these people, who cares? And the other thing I realized is I didn't enjoy making a nothing lunch nearly as much as I enjoyed pouring my heart into it. And so I just began the beginning of real spiritual training, which is, tell me when God is less present. We may perceive his presence more dynamically. And so because of that, we think that the presence of God comes and goes. But it's not that. It's our perception comes and goes. And so we look at these great masters, and this was the affirmation that Helen was reading. I will stand no matter what whirls around me, hold on to my hand. Oh, this was also then the whispers, hold on to my hand tightly. I love the way it was put. It wasn't merely, I will hold on to you, but you will hold on to me. Don't let me go. Have you ever had to hold on to a child's hand in a situation where you really don't want that child to escape? When the child might easily lose touch with what's going on and wander off. There's a a certain way that you grip it. You don't want to hurt the child, you don't want to make them upset, but you are not going to lose them in that context, And that's what we're asking the divine, is that you keep me conscious of your presence. And that's the entirety of sadhana, the entirety of spiritual practice, of meditation, of chanting, of affirmation, of selfless service. All of it is to make us constantly aware of the unchanging, unconditional, loving presence of the divine around us. And we do it. Sometimes you say it's for selfish reasons, but that which allows us to become an open instrument for the bliss and the power of the divine, that which dissolves the ego cannot itself be selfish. When Swami Kriyananda was in India, he lived there the first time from 1958 to 1962, and Anandamoyi Ma, for those of you who've read Autobiography of a Yogi, she's the bliss-permeated mother. And she was a great saint in India. She died in 1982. So she was there when Swami was there, and he had a extraordinarily deep connection with her. The way his guru was Yogananda, but Swamiji met Yogananda when Swami was 22, and before Swami turned 26, Yogananda had left this world. And so Swamiji said that he was always in such awe of Master that he was never able to be as childlike with him as he would have wanted to be. He was just too young as a disciple. 10 years later, when he was much more comfortable with the whole reality of being a devotee, he met Anandamoyi Ma. As he put it, he said, I had the kind of relationship with Ma that I was too young to have had with Master. But Ma always made Swami feel closer to Master, not farther away. There's no competition, is what I'm trying to say. But in this context, Ma showered love on Swamiji. And he said at a certain point, I feel selfish for taking so much of your time and your energy. And then Ma said to him, how can it be selfish when the result of the action is that the sense of self itself is dissolved? This is this peculiar, very hard to comprehend with the rational mind aspect of what the spiritual path is. As you become less and less yourself, you become more and more yourself. And people who see it only from the outside, and they see people sitting, meditating like this. When my father came to visit me at Ananda Village, and he was a very good man, but he had no understanding of what I was doing, but he was very open-minded, and he was always curious. That was his nature. So he came in to watch the meditation. I said, Daddy, not much is going to happen. So he sat in the back and he watched people meditate, like that. And he added it to the store of knowledge he had in his head. It was the only way he could think of to embrace my life. But it's not a spectator sport. And when you watch it, you think, what are these people doing? They appear to be doing nothing at all. And if you're going to think about what they're doing at all, you would think that they're just becoming utterly self-involved. And the mind just doesn't really quite know where to go with this. We don't understand that what we're actually doing by stopping to participate so intensely in the way that everybody does in, the phrase someone said is that all of advertising is eat me, buy me, take me home. That's sort of this constant, what can I eat, what can I buy, what can I bring home and fill my house with? When we just stop and try to experience contentment, but contentment not just on the level of I'm giving up, but contentment on the realization that all that I've been chasing is literally just shadows, just just light and dark, the play of light and shade, that the real emanating light is within myself. And so at first one imagines that the more one gets involved in the inner light, the bigger and more important I will be. And this is a problem on the spiritual path, is that sometimes when people begin to advance, they develop a great pride and ego. And Swamiji said, it's a problem because spiritual development is something really to be proud of. It's not like one of these sort of ephemeral things that you can do in this world where you can be so famous and so rich and so well known and then so forgotten so fast. Swamiji, as an author, our friends used to run this huge used bookstore here. This was before the age of Kindle and all of that. And so there were hundreds and hundreds of paper books. And Swamiji said he both liked to go there because he both wrote books and liked to read them. And he would go and he would fill a big bag of books. He says it was both enjoyable and also extremely depressing because, well, there were just all those books, that somebody had so lovingly written and published. And there would be like rows and rows of authors who used to be really, really popular. And now who even remembers them? And it's just it's always like that. We're so important to ourselves, and then the sands of time just go over us. I read an article published by a Princeton University English teacher, and he was writing it for his peers. He was more my generation because he was always teaching, of course, younger people, 20-somethings. And he made a long list of all of these references that authors of my generation make, thinking that they're shared. And he did a survey with his college students, and 90% of them were completely unknown. I made a reference once to Perry Mason, which those of you of my chronological development may remember as a television show about a lawyer who always won in some dramatic way. I just said Perry Mason, and some of my younger friends just stared at me, And then they would say something that was perfectly, everybody knew. No, I never heard of it. I know nothing. This is a very small example, but it just goes away like that. But when we transcend that limited sense of identification, that little self. See, this is all we're dealing with. This is the best words for this. People use the word ego, which is, of course, a perfectly good word. Swami, all the masters use it. But it's a little confusing as to know what's ego, what's spirit. But think of it like this. What do we identify with? When I say I, me, mine, I, me, mine, what am I talking about? When I use that pronoun, what am I thinking about? I mean, we tend to start with our name and our body and all of these things, but we have this whole other encyclopedia of self-definitions. All of our memories, all of our expectations, all of our hopes, all of our possessions, just zillions and zillions of things. When I say I, this is what I mean. But when I die and my consciousness goes on, Asha will just be like nothing. And, in the moment, I have a notable Instagram account. But just a tiny polar shift and all that electronics gets wiped out. And, who cares? And talk about ephemeral. But when my consciousness has existed long before it inhabited this body, it's inhabited countless bodies. And when I die, my consciousness will just move on. Swami put it to me once, just sort of like this. Nothing happens when you die. He said, just like that, nothing happens. And that's what all the wonderful near-death experiences tell us now. And all the wonderful movies where the actor falls over and then the actor stands up and now he's just the same or she's just the same, but they can walk through walls and nobody sees them. But the image, the artistic image is exactly right, exactly the same. Whatever actual vibration of understanding we have achieved, and whatever attunement we have to non-material realities just goes with us unchanged. We just move from the material to the non-material world. And that's all that endures. How much have I loved above all? Who am I in relation to that eternal bliss? How much of that eternal bliss have I made my own? And so, we begin to develop in there. This is what I was saying. We think that self-realization with a capital S is going to be, I'm going to finally get this little thing organized. And we spend a lot of time on the spiritual path very tensely trying to get it organized, trying to do it right, trying to understand exactly how the Kriya is done and what the lesson is in this and what the Sanskrit pronunciation is and just all of this. And we think when I finally get it really in order, then it's going to work. But it never happens because the nature of that identification is constant change, and we just can't make it perfect, no matter how hard we try. And this whole world, the poor you will always have with you. There will always be limitation on this side of it. But what happens is we realize that this whole thing that I was calling I all this time was just a suit of clothes, and that behind it there's always been this unchanging light. And we just shift our attention. And it's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And we need to keep it very, very simple. This is what Swami is trying to tell us with all these stories. And Jesus was trying to tell us with Martha and Mary, and Mary Magdalene was trying to demonstrate for us. Mary Magdalene didn't identify with herself anymore. She didn't care what other people thought of her. What difference did it make? She had one thought in her mind. Jesus is here. He is the light of my life. He is the liberating power of my destiny. And absolutely nothing else matters. And why is that important? Because of the bliss it gave to her. The always present, but only sometimes perceived bliss of our own nature. And so that's why Swami's writing here. He's saying, don't get lost in the details. Of course, we have to work hard. We have to do our best. We have to discipline ourselves. We have to use common sense about how we behave in this world. But it's not an end in itself. Mary has chosen the better part. Martha, yes, you're feeding us and you're giving us good meals and we're really glad about it. But Mary is remembering the presence of the divine within. And once we begin to do that, everything else follows, just as simple as that. And our perfection is not because we've gotten the small self perfected. It's that because we no longer identify with that small self. And it does well and it does badly and it ages and it's nice or it's not nice or whatever it does. But it's, as Swami called it, it's an event that we have to take care of, that we're responsible for. But we choose the better part. We choose the better part, which is to consciously and constantly think of the divine within. Bless you.